Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's session of On My Mind. My name is Ash King. I am a mental health educator and in-house psychologist with Support Act, and I'm super grateful to have you all joining us here today for this very important session. So what we're going to be exploring today is the idea of getting sober curious. We're going to be chatting about drugs, booze, and what life and the music scene might be like without them. We're here thanks to the support of Headspace. You can check out their app and give yourself a moment of mindfulness. And firstly, I'd love to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we each call home to here in Australia. I'm speaking to you live from Gadigal land today. I pay my respects to First Nations people and welcome all First Nations folks joining us here today. I'm also very grateful to be joined this afternoon by some epic guests who are here to share some of their wisdom, insight, and lived experience when it comes to drugs, booze, and music. First up, we've got Scott Owen, insane talent and bass player in the Living End. Howdy, Scott, and welcome.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
We've also got Neil Hunt, who runs Shore Shaker Music and manages artists, including Sticky Fingers, The Moving Stills, and Apricot Inc. Howdy, Neil. Welcome.
Thanks, Ash. Yeah, I'm stoked to be here. It's good.
And we've also got Amber Rules, psychotherapist, clin counsellor, and director of Rough Patch Counselling. She's had some lived experience in the music scene. She's a mental health facilitator who specialises in supporting people impacted by addictions. Hey, Amber.
Hey, Ash. Thanks for having me.
Thank you everyone for being here. And, this is a pretty sticky topic when it comes to the music industry. I'm sure that anyone who has spent any time here, including myself, prior to getting registered as a psych, was a working muso for a number of years, is no stranger to the drugs and alcohol that are floating about the scene at every corner. So I'd love to chuck a poll out there for our participants with a little question for you. Do you reckon the music industry has a drug and alcohol problem? Check out the poll, give us your response, be curious to see how everyone thinks and feels about this topic. Neil, I'd love to start with you. And I'd love to hear a little about what, your attitude was to things like drinking and drugs when you first got into the music industry. Tell us a little bit of buying into, the whole mythology of the scene.
Yeah, I think that's what I did largely. So, I found that for me, music was, I started in bands and writing music and whatnot. So for me, it was a kind of,
Oh no.
We lost
it.
it.
No.
Just as he was kicking into things. Look, we might wait until Neil comes back online. Scott, I might throw it to you. I'd love to know, where was your head at when you first slipped into the scene with all this?
Overwhelming force, and I had.
He's back.
Oh, have you got me?
Sorry, Neil, we lost you for a sec.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I'll move.
The last 30 seconds.
I had no capacity to kind of analyze, I guess, as much as anything else, what the music that I was listening to with it, any kind of subjectivity, and nor the kind of, I guess, the behavior of the participants. So, yeah, I bought into a lot of mythology from people, I think, that were, some of it was real, some of it wasn't. And that's what the entertainment industry sort of specializes in, is selling that kind of mythology. So I bought in Hollis Bolus for a long time and I was a long way in before I realized that at least some of the participants weren't living the way I was. And if they were, they couldn't have been nearly as productive. So yeah, it caught up in the mythology, I think, is the best way of putting it. And I try with the people that I work with to point out how that exists and the damage that can cause, especially to people who are, I guess, who are overwhelmed by music. There's a personality type. That's drawn to, I think, music and especially emotional engagement from music. Although I guess that's a lot of us. I guess we all have an element of it, is probably a better way of putting it. But some of us are a bit more susceptible to it than others. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about the mythology itself. Is it this idea that if you're in the music scene, if you're making music, if you're getting up on stage, that, you need to be, off your head for a certain amount of time, or what?
Yeah, I like, for me, I think there's a couple of elements of it. That wasn't the sole thing for me. It was about what, although that's all that's accurate, it was as much for me, it was about the things that I considered to be credible, the music that I considered to be credible. And it took me a long time before I was understand. And I know this sounds naive, but it took me a long time before I was able to understand the concept that, you know, credibility is an incredibly subjective term. And actually, generally speaking, it's a term that's been marketed to us by the music industry. So you're gifted all these things that you like, and you think, oh, I like that because it's obviously superior to that, you know, whatever, someone's superior to Harry Styles or whatever, because Harry Styles is not renowned for his capacity to, you know, get on it. And so it took me a long time to get around the notion that was really purely subjective. So yeah, I think there's that element. There's the element that goes for me to be able to perform. I felt like I had to drink. I felt like I had to be taking something and drinking. You know, part of that's anxiety related. I guess I was not confident. And yeah, you know, it's a double-headed or triple-headed beast to me. There's the kind of anxiety. There's the notion that you're marketed what's credible and what's not credible, or you buy into that. Yeah, I think. Does that sound suitable?
Yeah, cheers for your insight there. Scott, I'd like to ask you, you know, did you end up buying into any of that mythology, you know, when you started out in music, about, you know, what it meant to exist in the music scene and the need for drugs and drink?
Yeah, I can totally relate to what Neil's said there about that, because yeah, it did. It was all drinking and being on drugs, and was just all part of the package of, you know, the whole package of rock and roll and music and the arts, and the package of like abandonment and being in the moment and all of this kind of stuff, and living a life of Friday and Saturday nights, you know, where you're playing 5 or 6 nights a week, and it's always party town, you know, for the crowd. So you kind of, you know, you go along with it. And I was brought up in a house where drinking was very, very accepted. My parents both drink, you know, they had epic parties, they had great times in the 80s with their friends and you know, family and stuff. There was always tons of drinking going on, so I always just really connected drinking with having a good time. It was just part of it, you know. It was, to me, it was just the ultimate way to have a good time. There was not really much of it, such a thing as having a good time without a drink in your hand. And so that just kind of bled into the mythology of music as well. And, you know, just, I guess, the kind of abandonment of being on stage and just really letting everything go falls really nicely into drinking, or drinking falls nicely into that, whichever way you want to look at it as well. And yeah, I did kind of admire bands that were good at drinking and partying and getting and being on drugs and being high and still being able to put on a great show and all that kind of stuff. I felt like it was all just part of the package, because I just had this kind of inbuilt sort of normalcy to drinking, and, you know, drinking just being part of it, just being such a normal part of it. And I guess I just had no idea that was only like Neil was saying, that, you know, not everybody subscribes to that. You know, some people just played music for the sake of music. It wasn't about being off your head and having a great time. Some people were, you know, some people studied music and took it seriously. Wow, I had no idea. I thought everyone was just getting loose and having a great time. But yeah, you know, there's definitely other ways to do it. It just didn't occur to me. I just leaned more towards the bands and the artists and stuff that were just, I admired them more, and being loose was just part of it. And I think it also carried this kind of air of sort of living above everything, you know, like being privileged. Like
Mm.
I don't have a care in the world. There's, you know, there's beer, there's booze, there's a hospitality rider delivered every day, and I don't have to go to work, and I don't have to. My feet don't have to hit the ground like everybody else's do. So I can afford to. I can afford to function in this kind of dysfunctional way. I can just kind of float across the top and never kind of really properly accept responsibility for anything. And
I agree
yeah,
with that.
yeah,
And the
you
use
just
of
kind
that
of feel privileged.
abandonment's great.
Yeah,
Sorry, keep going.
yeah. Well, yeah, the abandonment thing, because it was fun, you know. Like I was like you. I probably drank for anxiety reasons more than anything else. But I used to feel like, you know, I can't sing without the taste of alcohol in my mouth. It won't work properly. And I can't play without feeling like, you know, at least having had a few drinks, um, which normally bled into having had too many drinks and not actually being able to play as well as I should be or could be.
And I think
But
that
it was,
the overindulgence, sorry to cut you off,
no,
Scott,
that's
but like
okay.
is also part of the mythology, right? It's not just like, yeah, we can have a drink. It's like, no, we can have a shitload of drinks, and that's how it's done. That sort of hedonistic pursuit, where you're not really looking to like, well, what's this life gonna look like in 5 years if I do this every single night? It's just like, let's live for the moment. Let's just get out there on stage and like cut loose. And that's, I think, definitely a really, really strong thread in music that, especially in specific genres of music, that kind of still carries through to today. Amber, I'd love to ask you about, your experience working in the music industry and what you saw in regards to sort of drug and alcohol use there.
Yeah, it was quite a time, and in a lot of ways, like I was really lucky that I got into music when I was quite young. Like I started working in music when I was 19. So that was dangerous in a lot of ways for a young woman with a brain that still was not fully developed. I was still a teenager. So a lot of that was, I really, resonate with a lot of the stuff that both Neil and Scott have both said, just about like how exciting it is and how much a part of the culture that it is. And especially when you're young, I think, and just sort of, or at least for me, trying to find my feet amongst this kind of, not just an industry that I wanted to work in, but like all of a sudden I was an adult and I had jobs and I had to sort of fit in and, do grown-up stuff. Drinking and taking drugs is really easy to do when it's on offer and you're young and impressionable and all that kind of stuff and you want to fit in. So that was, for me, that was part of the experience for me. And I have a family history of addiction as well. So like it was very familiar to me. It was very much already a part of my world. I guess in a way that made it not big and scary. It was just like a really natural transition to use drugs and alcohol to excess. So yeah, it was great fun as well. Like I wouldn't change that. I came to understand there was no longevity for me. And I came to understand that through, my family experiences, and I don't know, just luck of the draw, I guess, I became aware that if I didn't do something about it, that it could proceed to being really dangerous for me. And then, a couple of things happened. I met my partner and he doesn't work in music, and was kind of like, this is full on, man. Like if you want to be in a relationship, you might need to like pump the brakes a bit here. And because I was still working sort of, with live music mostly, I was going out 4 or 5 nights a week. It's really hard when you go to work at a pub to not drink.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of cultural stuff that happens that makes this easy. And I guess that's why it's really important to me. And certainly the therapeutic work I do with artists is around like, how do you keep hold of who you are and what your values are and who you want to be really as a person in a culture that might be pushing you to do stuff that, not even that you don't want to do, but that maybe there's going to be a expiration date on. And I think that's a really hard thing to do. You have to do some really thoughtful internal work around what your values are in order to kind of take care of yourself in those kind of systems and cultures, I think.
For
So
sure.
that was my experience that I needed to pull up. And then I realized that a lot of the musicians that I was working with needed therapists more than they needed a tour manager. So I decided to become a therapist.
Thanks for sharing, Amber. I think, you know, one of the really important things to acknowledge when it comes to sort of drink and drug use is sort of our each of our, I say, individual relationships with drink and with drugs. I'm going to throw another poll up for everyone joining us here today. And that's going to be asking you guys, does your relationship with drink and drugs impact your life and work negatively? Love to hear from you. Jump into the poll and let us know. Scott, I'd like to chat to you a little bit about your relationship with booze and drugs. You know, you mentioned briefly that it was probably something to do with anxiety, but what do you reckon, you know, the booze and drugs were doing for you? Like, what did they make you feel? What did they allow you to drown out? And what did they, you know, allow you to sort of feel into a bit more?
Well, I guess the thing was early, you know, when I was sort of 18, 19, 20, you know, when I was younger, a lot younger, um, I wasn't really trying to drown out anything. There wasn't anything bad going on. It wasn't tragic. It was just a habit. It was just a habit that I couldn't really keep a lid on. I just used to start drinking at a certain point in the day, and I just wasn't able to do that thing that most people can do, where they say, okay, I've had a drink or two or three or however many I wanted to have, and now I'll stop. I'd just keep going. If there was more to have, I'd just have them. And the only sort of tragic thing about my drinking was my drinking. You know, I wasn't trying to run away from anything or hide from anything sort of major. But then it went on for years. You know, it just kept on going on and on for years, and that was when it started to create bigger problems, because that was when I started to realize that, you know, years and decades were sort of slipping away from me, and I was, you know, failing to just achieve the kind of personal developments that people achieve when they're living a good and healthy life. I'm just kind of, you know, I could just feel that it was just like a big Groundhog Day of, you know, living the same life over and over and over again. Just, you know, the same headaches in the morning and the same drinking patterns, and you know, taking the edge off in the afternoon, and then starting to get a bit pissed throughout the evening, and then ending up pretty loose by the end of the night. It was just, I was just you know, it was really just biding so much time, and yeah, you know, I can't say that I had any sort of major issues, mental health issues with anxiety or anything like that in the first place that caused it. I think it was kind of the other way around. I think I just found myself in such a comfortable trap of drinking that that the issues kind of all arose around that. And I only stopped drinking 4 years ago, and it still seems like it's not that long ago, because I'm in my late 40s now. So 4 years ago is only a speck of time, basically, in all those years. So, but it's revealed now over the years, and it's still kind of revealing all of these things that I was kind of covering up with drinking, all of these kind of responsibilities that I wasn't accepting to their full degree, and all of these, like I said, like all of these developments that I just weren't undertaking because I was uninhibited. I was too drinking too much to really give a shit about any of that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you raised something really interesting, and I think, Amber, I'd love to chat to you about this next. But you know, I guess there is kind of somewhat of an idea that, you know, people use drugs or drink because they're trying to run away from something or trying to deal with, you know, trauma or maybe some sort of mental illness. But you know, what can happen very easily is it can just be a product of one's environment. You know, it's just like very easy to do, and then it can very easily become a habit, and sort of, you know, leaning on this habit throughout time does, I guess, get in the way of growth, does get in the way of us sort of leaning into certain discomforts that help us make changes for, you know, for positive reasons, or allow us to connect better with our family, with our relationships, with our kids. Amber, I'd love to hear from you about this idea that, you know, drugs and alcohol are only, you know, picked up when you're trying to run away from something.
Yeah, it's a really common one. And I think, you know, really it's complex and it's different for each person. And there is truth to the idea that for some people that is absolutely the case. In fact, maybe for a great deal of people that's the case, but often we don't realize it. So when we talk about trauma, it's not necessarily something, you know, like a big terrible thing that's happened. Trauma can just be, I grew up in a household where my parents didn't quite understand me the way I needed to be understood when I was a developing little person, you know. And so when we think about it that way, one of the ways I like to conceptualize addiction, which I think is quite simple, is that it's a habit that develops over time that assists us with self-soothing. So, you know, something as simple as being nervous about going on stage can be enough, if you do it repetitively enough, to form the neurological pathway that tells you, I feel nervous, oh shit, I need a drink, you know? Or I'm really excited, I'm going to go out, I'm going on tour, and I know the part of my brain knows that means I get to use drugs every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how an addiction really forms. It's the repetition that's the addictive part. Of course, there is, for some people, they reach the point of physical dependency on a substance. But for a lot of us, it doesn't actually get to that point. That's kind of the really severe end of the scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that, Amber. Just having a look at the polls, so a few people just sharing their own personal relationships with drink and drug. You know, a bunch of people saying maybe, almost 40%, 50% people saying no, you know, so I guess it's also worth, you know, exploring the whole idea that if you're, you know, using drink or drugs in certain ways, you don't feel like it's impacting negatively in areas of your life. I'm going to chuck to another poll now, just a little bit of trivia for this one, asking if you guys know roughly what percentage of Australians have an addiction or substance use issue. Have a little guess there and see what you think might be the answer. So, Amber, I might just come back to you again just briefly. I want to see if you can tell us a little about the difference between being addicted and just enjoying a drink or having a good time with drugs.
Yeah. Well, I think two things can be useful to think about. One can be, how's it impacting me? So physically, am I feeling well? Do I have, you know, a really good way of checking if you're drinking too much in particular is getting a liver function test. You know, and finding out where your liver baseline is and then checking it again in 6 months, that's a good indicator. It's like how clear-headed I feel, how often I need to kind of sleep extra or I don't sleep enough, you know, all of those basic kind of health things, which can be about other things as well. So it's how it affects my life physically, how it affects my life emotionally, you know, how do I feel? Is my mood up and down a lot? Do I need to drink or use drugs in order to feel like I'm functional? Do I feel better? Like when if you're a smoker, like if you're getting to that point where you get so agitated, irritated if you don't have a cigarette, and then you have a cigarette and you instantly feel better, that's an indicator that you're addicted to nicotine, right? And it's kind of similar with drugs and alcohol as well, or can be. And then the other thing is, which a lot of people say to me, is like, oh, I don't think I have a problem. And, you know, that poll that you just talked about is probably a good indicator too. It doesn't, you know, impact my work unless someone else says it does.
Right.
Someone else who cares about you says, yeah, you might not think you've got a drinking problem, but you're an asshole once you've been drinking, you know, as example. So those are the two types of things that I would say are good indicators, like I guess behavioral indicators. Mm-hmm. But the other is you can absolutely be physically addicted to a substance. Mm-hmm. I think the word addiction is such a stigmatized, loaded word. I would much prefer to say that you're either, and this is the scientific kind of way of looking at it, you're either dependent on a substance physically, or you are emotionally dependent, which is a very different beast. You know, you might be emotionally dependent on one single cigarette a day. Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean you're addicted to the substance necessarily, but there's obviously a pattern of behavior there that if you don't want to be doing that, then it's detrimental to your health. You could consider that being addicted.
Yeah, that's really interesting way of conceptualizing it. Thanks, Amber. Neil, I'd love to hear from you, like in regards to, I guess, what Amber was just saying, this idea of emotional dependence and physical dependence. What was your relationship with drink and drugs?
It started, I think it arcs, yeah. So it has, and I guess it more than just arcs. It fluctuates in what can, I guess, loosely be called an arc shape or an upward shape until you stop. I think it started, kind of casually, a lot like Scott was saying, and it crossed between what Scott and Amber saying. Both said things that I really resonate with me. One of them was the Amber mentioned was that the nature of the way you start being, and Scott mentioned this as well, but the way you start being kind of calibrated to the type of person you are. So it may be that you're a sensitive soul whose parents didn't understand them the way they would like to have been understood, as paraphrasing Amber. I think that then it begins more, or for me, it begins more as a kind of casual thing, but it eventually, for me, it took hold quite radically badly to the point where if I look back on it, I guess even in the beginning, I was drinking to blackout, but not as severely as I was towards the end. So at the end, definitely I was drinking to blackout. Sometimes it would take 6 hours, sometimes it would take 3 days, but at the beginning, it seemed more gentle at the beginning. It seemed more kind of introductory, So, and I think for me, I definitively had a physical dependency on it. I've stopped drinking 20 years ago, a little bit over 20 years ago, and I still, at 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I still have an intense craving for sugar. I still can't chuck the licorice all sorts or the whatever, at 5 or 6, I'm like, I got to have some sugar. I got to have some sugar. My kids love it, but I try to cap it, but I joke about it, but that could also be attributable to the fact that I didn't do a program that stepped me away from the addictive part of it. I did it sort of by myself, and so I don't have that kind of my muscle memory or the brain function that kind of goes, you know how to deal with this, I should also note there that as part of my moving away from alcohol, at the time I was able to finally walk away from it, alcohol in particular, drugs and cigarettes, actually, I had no problem with cigarettes, or not much of a problem. I smoked for about 17 years. And then it came to a point where I was losing my life was basically falling away, and I had to make a decision because cigarettes were at that point really expensive for me. I sort of went, well, can I drink without smoking, or can I smoke without drinking? And I chose alcohol. So I was able to walk away from that just financially. I kind of had to sustain my drinking. But I lost track of what I was going to say there. Sorry, my apologies. What I was going to say is I had when I stopped drinking, what I replaced it with was I started managing bands. And so I would just work, at the beginning, I would just work ceaselessly. I found I didn't have clear boundaries. Probably still don't have clear boundaries. But yeah, in answer to the question about how do I find was it a physical dependency? Yes, it was. It still has an element of bearing on my, physical and mental well-being. Like I said, there comes a time during the day where I really feel like I've got to get some sort of sugar to charge me.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just interject with some of the science around that? Because I think this is really fascinating. Like, we don't fully understand why people get addicted yet. Like, there's no definitive science. And in fact, even within the psychology world, there are people who feel like use the medical model and say that it's a disease and something we're born with. There's not a great deal of evidence about that, although that has been really embedded in our culture by things like 12-step, like AA. And then there's the other idea that it's around trauma and the environments that we are in. And I think realistically, it's probably a combo of everything. But what that makes really hard is understanding something like, why 20 years after stopping drinking do you have the sundowner feeling? It's fascinating, really. I mean, and of course you're a person, and I'm sure that comes with challenges as well. So, you know, not meaning to sort of dehumanize your story here and turn it into a science experiment, but to say
I'm good with
to
it.
say that like we just don't understand why it happens. And I think, you know, everyone comes to sobriety or even reducing their drinking in different ways. And I guess this is me saying that however you get to it is okay. I think there's a lot of rhetoric in the psychology world about you must stop drinking altogether in order to, you know, not be addicted. And that just, and 12 steppers in particular, again, I think 12 steppers got its place and it's been extraordinarily supportive for the people that it does work for. But unfortunately, statistically, it actually doesn't work for a great deal of people. Now, I know 12 steppers feel pretty strongly about 12 step and that's okay, but there are many roads to Rome. And I think that, you know, if you're finding yourself in this position, the way you describe, Neil, is kind of like this, you know, the bell curve. There is a sort of a continuum of addiction. And for the most part, you can pull back. There is only a small percentage of people who get to the point where it's like, if I don't stop this, I will never be able to stop. And of course, some people just make that choice because it's better for you and it's easier and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that's a really important point around like you can pull back, but it's very difficult to do that without having the support and the skills and the understanding, because we actually don't get taught how to do that. And if we go back to the idea that this is about self-soothing, something like having licorice all sorts in the afternoon is a great way of self-soothing, right?
Yeah.
You put something in your mouth, you get to have that hand-to-mouth action, you get to have a nice hit of sugar, it gets you through till dinner. Like that's a great way of coping. You know, so I think we got to find ways of doing that stuff, and we either do it by, you know, just picking up these habits, or by sort of thinking about it and going, oh, is that why I do that? And how might I like to do that differently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially in the music industry, it's kind of just almost like handed to you as like, this is the way that you do this, you know, this is how we do it here. And so, you know, it's no surprise that, you know, everyone here has kind of spoken about, you know, being sort of young and entering into the scene. And it's just like, yeah, let's get on it. That's what we do.
That's a big part of it. That what you just said there is a big part of it. It's part, you know, like when you're starting out, you know, alcohol is considered the payment, and they're like, as Scott mentioned before, or Amber, I can't remember, but the networking, everything, networking and the payment section of it is all based around your capacity to drink or take drugs or get wasted. And I mean, you know, that model's shifting now. You know, it has been shifting for the last maybe five years with some intensity. But yeah, that's, you know, that's a good point. It's you get paid. There's a normalcy to it. You're expected to be able to do it or to do it, and you do. You buy into it. So, yeah, sorry.
I'd love to just ask our guests today for another question in the poll, and just letting you know that what percentage of Australians have an addiction or have a substance use issue. 5% is correct. So it's sort of like a pretty decent slab of Aussies here that we're talking about. I'd love to ask you guys at home, have you ever tried to cut back your drinking or drug use? And that is you know, something that I'd like to go to Scott with. We kind of briefly touched on it, but I'd just like to know sort of what was going on for you when you decided, you know, maybe it's time for me to cut back or stop.
Okay. Yeah, over the years, I've kind of gone like Neil was saying, you know, there's a bell curve, but it's kind of a bit of a wavy line. It doesn't just go up, it kind of goes up and down, but it generally goes, it's a bit like real estate prices or something. So I would, you know, I'd have times when I would be on tour and I'd be pretty hopeless, you know, like I'd be straight into the beers or whatever pretty early in the day, and the habit would probably become pretty physical. But then I'd also have times when I was at home and I was able to put boundaries in place for myself and place rules upon myself and stick to them pretty well for, you know, a month or two here and there. But yeah, it just you know, it just kind of got, I don't know, just kept getting more and more tragic as I got older and older, basically. So I got to, and I always kind of had this thing in my head of particularly smoking, because my parents both quit smoking when they were 40, but I was thinking about drinking as well. I was like, maybe maybe I can just be as loose as I want, and I can just kind of, yeah, like float around in this kind of, I'm a rock star kind of world till I'm 40, and then cut a new path, and it'll be okay. And I kind of always had this line in the sand, like when I turn 40, I should probably grow up, and getting a handle on those things would be part of that. And so I guess I kind of pushed it out for another 5 years or something before a bit less than that, a few more years. And what happened was I decided to stop drinking for 6 months. And because I started to get into this mentality of, like, I really need to shift my attitude towards alcohol, because this not having a handbrake and just basically pushing it until there's either no beer left or I'm like pretty much legless and just need to crash out. Pretty much pushing it to that point all the time, even after I've thought, no, I'm going to be sensible today, I'm only going to have a few or whatever, and then that always just blowing out. I thought it just kind of, as I got older, I just thought, I just need to change that attitude. I've really got to be able to get a grip on that attitude. So I had 6 months without alcohol, and then I started drinking again, and nothing had changed. I was straight back to where I had always been within a short period of time. In fact, I was looking forward to it. I was like, right, can't wait till that 6 months is up. Can't wait. That first drink, that first night on the booze is going to be unreal. And sure enough, no change in habit, no change in attitude. So then I was with my partner and myself, and a couple of other couples were just talking about, let's have a year off drinking. And they were friends that I was used to drinking with and partying with and stuff like that. And we all just kind of made this pact to have a year off. It wasn't a big deal. It was just kind of something that we talked about, and we've talked about it before, after those big nights or big weekends or whatever, and gone, God, why are we still doing, in the sober light of day afterwards? We talked about it, and we just kind of went, yeah, let's do it. And this was a couple of days before New Year's Eve that this conversation happened. And we went, yeah, let's just do it. Let's just start on the 1st of January. Let's just start and all have 1 year off alcohol. And I just did it. It wasn't hard. It wasn't like a massive epiphany. It wasn't a huge thing. It was kind of casual, and we just did it. And there was probably about 6 or so people that embarked on it, and there's 3 left. There's 3 of us left still that haven't had a drink since then. Most of them dropped off, but there's only 3 of us left now. But it wasn't huge. It wasn't it was in some ways, but I think just in the general scheme of things, I think the message I'm trying to get across is, people think that it has to be with AA or with, like it has to have all of this involvement to stop drinking, but it is possible to just stop.
Yeah.
And to just not make a big deal out of it and go, yeah, it's going to be hard. I did a lot of, I'm a bit of a researcher, I did a bit of reading about it, a lot of just trying to educate myself. I did the same with smoking cigarettes, and I tried to quit a few times, but what got me through this time, which was back then, was just having an education and just going, okay, so if I look into the science of nicotine cravings, I know that I'm going to have one about every 2 hours, and it's going to last for less than 5 minutes. So when a craving comes, just having that knowledge and going, okay, and being able to look at the clock and go, the way I'm feeling right now is only going to happen that many times today, and it's only going to last for that long. I know that in less than 5 minutes, I will feel normal again. And that's what would be what got me through the cravings. And I'd also know that it's going to be like that for this many days. And then after this many days, it's going to settle down to this. And I think just being backed by all that knowledge really helped, because it all of a sudden didn't seem like a giant mountain to overcome of not ever drinking or doing drugs or smoking cigarettes again. But that's like, holy shit, really? Like, how the hell am I going to exist as that person, but to be able to go, no, you know, just to be able to have a bit of education about it, I think helps.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure. Amber, I'm seeing you nodding along there. I'd love to hear about, you know, your experience working with people and the research and the all that cool stuff that sort of helps support people.
Well, there's two things that you said, Scott. One was, you know, that you stopped for a year. And so that's kind of the opposite of being addicted through repetition. You were sort of, you know, recovering through repetition, which I think is a really important part of this whole thing, is that when human beings do something enough, it becomes easier. So, you know, if you are somebody who wants to reduce or wants to experiment with stopping, I always recommend to my clients, how do you feel about just stopping for 3 months and see what happens? You know, we'll notice together what goes on. And very often people start to feel better within a couple of weeks. And like you said, the urges and cravings get easier to manage by yourself. You start to feel a sense of agency and be like, oh, I can do this. And then oftentimes, I think the other part of that's quite important is around identity. You know, how we perceive ourselves and what it means to be like, some of my clients have said to me, similar to what you just said, around like, I might reach a certain age and then I think it's probably time for me to stop. It's not a good look, you know, that kind of stuff. That's about identity.
Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't matter what, like you said before, it doesn't matter what makes you stop. Like there was another person in the group that we stopped with at the same time whose pure motivation for stopping was vanity. It was like, I don't want to look old, I don't want to look fat, I don't want to look, and we were going, oh man, whatever gets you through the year. Sure, doesn't matter, does it?
I think underneath all of this, there is some, you know, if you want to reflect more deeply on what it is that's so compelling about drug, alcohol and nicotine use, is like to think about identity. And I think, you know, back to what we were saying earlier around the culture of music or just, you know, creative arts in general, is like the sex, drugs and rock and roll kind of thing. You know, a lot of people are drawn to music because of that. And I think probably a lot of people who aren't artists, you know, people who do the peripheral kind of, you know, management, admin kind of stuff in particular, might be excited by that aspect of it, which is fair enough. But I think when we stop doing something that is so maybe integral to how we perceive ourselves, it can be very sort of destabilizing in a lot of ways. And it really takes a lot of reflection and maybe even reimagining how we want to be and who we want to be. And that's hard work. Like, you know, that takes a lot of energy and time and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Neil, I'd love to hear from you on this. You know, did you feel like there was a shift in, you know, your identity or how you were able to define yourself when you walked away from your relationship with drinking?
Yes, I did. I kind of, I have a little bit of the opposite story to Scott. I think that I agree with him on the whatever it takes you to stop, you do that, and you run with it. For me, I was pretty antisocial towards the end there. I was pretty, I mean, some people would argue that I still am, but I was pretty, like I said, I blacked out. I was tapping into a sort of pretty deep well of anger that I had, and I'd never really been forced to confront, you know, I guess the vagaries or misunderstandings or my relationship with anger. I'd never been forced to confront what it was, and confrontation, I guess, in some manner with people, how I reacted and how I sought out a similar response either from myself or from other people in my relationships. So that am I clear in what I'm saying there? Because that's kind of integral to this thing. At the back end of it, for me, there was a lot of anger that had come up over different things I hadn't, you know, this relates to Scott's thing of saying you were able to walk away from reality as other people knew it. You were able to not be responsible for things. You were able to, you know, you have a sense of abandonment. I completely agree with that. But at the bottom of that for me was this thing of being angry and of having anger towards, or always drawing anger as a response. So when I gave up, I mean, on the way out, which was a long way, I couldn't do what Scott did, where I couldn't just look at it and Partly, I don't think I had the capacity to educate myself, but it's brilliant, Scott. I really admire it. It's great. I had to keep trying and trying and trying to give up. And I had to acknowledge that I was trying to give up to myself, and I had to acknowledge that I was responsible for giving up. But along the way, I had all this anger, and so or relationship with anger. I wasn't always angry, but I would always find myself in a circumstance where I was getting a similar response from people. So I had to work through that. Obviously, I lost. I communicate now with 3 people that through my life, very irregularly, that were there from my drinking days. So, and I saw one the other day who I probably haven't seen for maybe 6 years or something. So they're irregular. They sort of drop into my life now. All my relationships changed. Is the point I'm trying to make. But I do, man, the people, what Amber said earlier about going, oh, did I love it at the time? For a decent portion of what I was doing there, man, I loved it. I really loved it. And the people that I see now, the 3 people that I see very occasionally now, are all guys that all kind of had a great understanding of my alcoholism in particular. And I love seeing them. I see him every 2 years, like this guy 5 or 6 years or whatever, and I see him, and it's he still drinks. If he can control it, and he can control it, he can run his life. He can be, he can do things I can't do. Good on him. But yeah, like I said, it changed all my relationships, and I had to have a sort of self-accounting about the way I thought about, or the way I dealt with my emotions. I guess I just hadn't grown up. I just hadn't faced a few things. I pissed my family off. I kept trying to blame other people for what my life had become, and my father was in that, and which is a pretty sort of unseemly shit thing to do. So I kind of think, in a way, I did have a bit of an epiphany, or maybe I was just searching for an epiphany, and I wasn't going to have until I found it, But like I said, I attacked my father in particular and went, what the fuck were you thinking? Why did you let me do this? Why did you let me do that? And it took me, again, a little bit of time to realize that, this is what I had. I was in great part responsible for the creation of this being. I'd been gifted a start that was imperfect, but it was fucking privileged. Pardon my language. Oh, sorry. And it was privileged, and it was, it had afforded me a few opportunities which I was kind of ignoring, and in the race to get away from my responsibilities to myself. So yeah.
Thanks for sharing about that, Neil. I think that, speaking about the emotional component of, when you do walk away from the drink, or you do walk away from the drugs, what's left, and how you have to be able to learn to deal with that. I mean, one of the huge things that I do, working with my clients, is this idea that we were never taught how to deal with our feelings. And sometimes, feelings like anger, feelings like grief, these are big experiences that are happening inside us that we just have no fucking clue how to deal with. And Amber, I see you nodding, obviously fellow therapist over here. Is this kind of what you see when you're kind of supporting people through, reducing their drug and alcohol use or coming off altogether?
Yeah. I've had quite a few people over the course of my career tell me that they're really annoyed with me because they thought they were coming to see me to talk about drugs and alcohol, and turns out they had some emotional shit to work on, and just be like really frustrated that it's like, oh, this is what it's uncovered, and now I've got to fucking deal with this, which I really have empathy for, because I think that's how this stuff can sneak up on us, If it's really, again, goes back to what values we have, how we want to be in the world, the things we want to take responsibility for. And for a lot of people, it can come out of, and certainly was my experience, came out of starting a new relationship with somebody and wanting to be the best version of myself. And, for a lot of people, it happens when they have children or have a major life change. And I think there's so much to it, I was just thinking as you were talking, Neil, that it's also about, for me, when I started, and a lot of clients come to me, particularly those who are actively working in music, and we have conversations around like the things that we used to think was cool, or certainly for me, the things I used to think were cool and that were values have changed. I no longer think the things that I thought were cool when I was 20 are cool anymore at 40, you know? But I don't necessarily just change as a person just because my ideas of what's cool or how I want to be change. I need to actively put work into, you know, not feeling a certain way about something, or, you know, to use your example, Neil, there's anger sits there, but that doesn't necessarily mean you know what to do with it. It's just like, oh shit, there's a thing I need to manage. So that's a lot of the content of the work I do with my clients begins with drug and alcohol use and the practical stuff around how do I reduce or stop doing it. And then we sort of get to like the real work, which is what sits underneath that and what were the things that we were able to stave off with our drug and alcohol use that we now, you know, have come into focus and have to do something with them.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Amber. I'd love to move into sort of next sort of part of the session here and chatting about, you know, life and what it's like without drugs, without alcohol. For the participants who are joining us from home, feel free to jump into the Q&A section. If you've got a question for any one of our panelists or you'd like to share some of your own lived experience, just chuck it in there. We'd love to hear from you. I have a question about this idea that if you have decided to, you know, step away from the drug and alcohol use and you're still enmeshed in a scene, in an environment where it's going on all the time, where, you know, colleagues or work people or like bands you manage, whatever, are still, you know, engaging quite regularly. You know, what happens then? Neil, I'll throw it to you, sorry.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, this is an interesting question. I mean, part of, you know, for me, I found that when I sort of left, when I was able to finally walk away, I found that the behavioral characteristics, the behavior types, is a very conformist behavior to people that are getting wasted. I know that's, people hate me for saying that, but it's accurate. There are only 2 or 3 different character types of people that you see in those circumstances. And I feel like I kind of gave myself a slightly larger, you know, I went out of control, but a slightly broader range of characteristics. Now, one of the things, and you know, this has come up with me because of my association with bands or artists that do drink, which is what you're referring to. Yes, Ash, is that's
Yeah, well, you know, even just still existing in the music scene where it's happening, you know, everywhere and all the time.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm not, I mean, to answer that, I guess I sort of sit a bit outside the general music scene anyway. So I don't really, I don't sort of, for better or for worse, associate that much with all that many people that are in it. And I probably should, but I don't. Yeah. And the people that I do, generally speaking, are artists. And I guess the people that I do are also people that just don't get on it that much anymore, you know, so that's probably been accurate for a little while, but the artists that I work with do. And it's all I can speak to is my own experience here. I've been admonished for dealing with people that drink and take drugs and you know, like, you shouldn't be doing that. I don't want to defend my position, I guess, but I'm not sure what I should be doing, A, and I'm not sure if there's someone better qualified to do it, B, and I'm not sure if some of the people that I've dealt with in particular, I felt like if they didn't have music, they would have nothing. They would have, you know, their lives would be considerably poorer. They would, a couple of them, you know, I would worry would probably live on the street. So I guess, yeah, in answer to that, I don't deal with the wider music community all that much. So the kind of casual networking aspect of it, I do it, you know, things like Big Sound, I guess, which I love, and I like seeing, I actually quite like seeing people get on it. But like I said before, there's only 1 or 2 ways they behave when they're on it. There's no, you know, there's not this great broad range of, you know, non-conformist behavior that happens when you're getting wasted. It doesn't exist. It's a great, that really shattered me to find that out. Like, well, this behavior is actually probably more conformist than anything I could have possibly done anyway. Let's say, you know,
paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
That's a really great.
when you're drinking, the non-drinkers are boring, and when you're not drinking, the drinkers are boring.
It's boring. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
That's what I was just about to say, is like how tedious it is when and I think this is a really real difficulty for people when they want to reduce or stop drinking, is how tedious it is to be a person in a room full of people who are drunk or on drugs. It's just like so dull and so annoying and sometimes embarrassing, you know. And I think that's a really tricky part of like how do you stop being involved with that. And one of the things I had to do early on was just be like, I'm going home at 9:30. Like this, you're all boring the shit out of me, and you're reaching the point of like no return, and it's just no thanks. And I think we've all been there.
Sorry.
Well, sorry, go
It's
ahead.
also a bit of a, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off then. I thought I sensed a pause. But I was just going to say it's also a bit of a game of perception as well, because when you're drinking, you feel like pretty much everyone's drinking. You know, if you're at a festival or at an event or at a gig or whatever, you feel like, pretty much everyone's getting, you know, it's like you see what you want to see. You feel like, everyone's pretty much doing the same as me. And anyone who's not is just kind of pretty boring. So that's their own fault. And then you do the same on the other hand as well when you're sober at a gig or at a festival or at an event or something. You think, wow, most people are pretty much just kind of switched on and normal. And there's a few people who are loose, but that's their problem. It's kind of a game of perception. And this word keeps on throughout what Neil's been saying, and also what Amber's been saying as well, is this word, the word transformation keeps coming into my head. And I think that's the thing I appreciate the most about not drinking. It means I thought I had this also goes back to what Neil was saying about identity too. I thought I had my identity all kind of sorted. I just thought I was one of those people who didn't take life too seriously and would just kind of cruise through and drink and whatever, do whatever you want, have fun and that kind of stuff. And now I'm not one of those kind of people anymore. And I think it's wonderful to go through that kind of transformation in life. I think, how many times can you have the same night over and over and over again, the same conversation, chew the same ears, have your ear chewed by the same drivel over and over and over again? Like, how many what a boring way to live a whole life. I mean, half a life is still a lot of that, a lot of that drivel. Half a life is tons. But to be able to make a transformation and go, wow, I used to think that was fun and that this was boring, and now I think this is fun and that was boring. That's the best and worst of both worlds. What more could you ask for?
It's very fascinating, a good sort of reflection there, Scott. So we do have a couple of questions from people joining us at home. Sorry if I'm like pottering around a bit. My computer charger's just cucked it, so I want to make sure that my computer doesn't just shut down halfway through. Amber, I might chuck this one to you. We've got someone asking, what strategies are there to say no to drugs or refuse alcohol, but with the interesting caveat, without losing face? I think that's, an interesting point there. What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, but I think in some ways you've got to be willing to a degree to kind of state your boundaries and kind of make it known that like that you're trying something out to look after yourself. Now that's going to be different for each of us, but without knowing this person and their specific kind of experience, I would say, having some preloaded ideas can be really useful. Never leave anything to chance. Don't I think it's a recipe for disaster to be like, I'll just decide when I get there to see how many drinks I'll have. Commit to yourself, I'm going to have 2 drinks tonight and then I'm going to stop, or I'm going to have a drink and then I'm going to have a glass of water, that kind of stuff. But if you're refusing altogether, I think saying to people things like, oh, I actually can't at the moment, I'm taking some antibiotics, or I'm actually trying to have a couple of weeks off and see how that goes, or, some sort of version of no thank you and please don't step over this line again, I think is really important. And sometimes that's really hard to do. And you will definitely get people who are threatened or who are kind of affronted by the idea that either A, you're going to be a sober person in the presence of them when they're loose, which can be confronting, or that they wanted to have fun with you and they don't think they can have fun if you're not drinking or using drugs. And so I think being mindful about who you spend time with and sort of discerning whether they're going to be the type of people who are going to be able to respect your boundaries when you set them is a really good way of preparing yourself. It's better to be prepared before you're in that situation, because it actually is quite hard when put on the spot to kind of, you know, make something up. So I encourage people to have a little cheat list of good ideas. The other thing is just have a drink in your hand that looks like it could be a drink. It can just be Coke or something, you know, it doesn't have to be have alcohol in it. Can be a really useful one as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Amber. And thank you, everyone, all of our amazing guests today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us at home. It brings us to the end of this session, but you can catch the session again. We'll be popping it up on Facebook, so you can find it anytime there. Someone was also asking in the Q&A, you know, what might we do if you want to direct someone to start getting help if they want to become sober or change their relationship with drinking and drugs? We have a Support Act wellbeing helpline that can direct you to the right type of counsellors and support. So you can check out all the details about our wellbeing helpline on our website. We've also got a bunch of resources, which I'll chuck in the chat for you to check out. Again, there's some podcasts, there's some blogs, there's some information there about other people talking about their own experiences. And I'd love to, just extend a huge thank you to Neil, Scott, and Amber. Cheers heaps for sharing your insight, wisdom, and experience today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ash.
Cheers, Scott. You can also join us for Yarning Strong, which is going to be streaming live on Thursday, 19th of May. That'll be exploring First Nations perspectives on finding your identity in music. And our next On My Mind session will be happening on the 2nd of June, where we'll be talking about battling with big feelings, which is something that we spoke about today, and how mindfulness can help. We run these sessions in partnership with the Headspace app, and you can score 3 months free on the app with the code Support Act. So get on it. Thank you so much, everybody, and we hope to see you next time.